Well, good afternoon, everyone. Let's see here. Pearson Gaines, are you there?
Yeah,
You are there? How about you, Alex John? Are you there?
yeah,
Could you hear that music?
I loved it.
Okay, that was Jimi Hendrix. A lot of people don't know this, but Jimi Hendrix was a member of the 101st Airborne Division. He did not serve in Vietnam. He was actually sort of medically kicked out of the Army. It was a mutual agreement. He wasn't cut out for the Army, but he did serve. So he is a veteran. Of course, he died very tragically of an overdose. But one of the great guitarists of all times, one of the great rock and rollers of all time. That song is called "All Along the Watchtower." And it was not written by Jimi Hendrix. It was actually written by Bob Dylan, but made famous by Jimi Hendrix. So those are the three songs that I've played. Creedence Clearwater Revival, Fortunate Son was the first one. The second one was Gimme Shelter by the Rolling Stones. And then the third one was All Along the Watchtower. And that are the three songs that you'll almost always see played or sung or in most Hollywood movies about Vietnam. They're considered to be three of the most famous songs of the Vietnam War era. So if you're looking at me and you can see me, you're noticing I'm in a different place today. I am actually in my office at the university. If you were to come visit me during office hours, this is the office you would have walked into. You can see there's a lot of books behind me. You'll also notice off to my left up here are two statues that I will be talking a little bit about today. It's also a flag, a United States flag that was one of my students took down that was flown over Saddam Hussein's one of Saddam Hussein's palaces back in 2005, I believe it was. One of my Iraq veteran students flew that flag in my honor and sent it to me. Lots of books on Vietnam in this room. So anyway, I thought it was fitting that on the day that I'm going to be finishing the lecture on Vietnam, that I would be here in my office to discuss it with you. So today we're going to go home. We're going to bring all of the American troops home. We're going to finish this war. And I'm going to be talking also about the legacy of this war. What does it mean in American history? So we talked about Le Duc and Henry Kissinger negotiating the end of this war. And there's a picture, a picture of each of them. This is after it is over. We're not quite there yet in my lectures. There's what the peace table looked like in Paris. So let's talk a little bit about where the period that I'm in right now is about 1972. We have been under Vietnamization now for about 3 years. We're bringing most of the troops home. I'm still in Vietnam. I was there until June of 1971, and in the what we call the second advisory period. And as far as I was concerned, I had my doubts even then about how successful we would be in terms of winning this war. So I've got on the screen now a phrase called Watergate. In June of 1972, President Nixon has decided that he's going to run for re-election in 1972. The war is still going on. He has run as the anti-war candidate, as we talked about. But by the time 1972 rolls around, about 50,000 Americans have been killed. So there's almost as many Americans killed during Richard Nixon's years of office as there are during Lyndon Johnson's era. But in June of 1972, President Nixon got involved in a scandal. And the scandal is called, I have this phrase up here, Watergate. So I'm going to tell you a little about this because it makes a difference as to how this war ends. There was a man by the name of Daniel Ellsberg. Write his name down, Daniel Ellsberg, and his name is spelled E-L-L-S-B-U-R-G. Daniel Ellsberg, he's actually Dr. Daniel Ellsberg, was an analyst in the Pentagon. And he had actually spent some time in Vietnam. He was a former Marine, and he had spent some time in Vietnam back in the early advisory era, probably in the early 1960s. And as a defense analyst, he was doing a lot of analysis as to the history of America's involvement in Vietnam. And what he found in the records of the Pentagon told him that America believed way back in the earliest involvement that we had in that early advisory period, he believed that America never intended to win this war. They never believed that we could win this war. And they were making efforts to, even when we went in with great numbers in 1965, we really didn't feel like we could be successful. And he had the record of that. He had copies of American military people and civilian people writing memos saying, bad idea. Vietnam is almost not winnable because of the fact that the efforts on the part of the enemy will always be greater than the parts because of their goal of independence, their goal of reunification, all of those things that American leadership never was confident about this war. So he had these copies of all these memos, and he decided to give them to the media, and the media published them. And those documents are called the Pentagon Papers. They were published in 1971. So by 1972, Richard Nixon hates Daniel Ellsberg so much, and he will blame Daniel Ellsberg for why America has turned against this war. So we don't know exactly why these things happen, but some members of an organization called CREEP, C-R-E-E-P. How'd you like to be part of an organization called CREEP? CREEP was the committee to re-elect the president. The committee to re-elect the president. They broke into the Democratic National Committee's offices in a hotel apartment complex in Washington, D.C. called Watergate. Watergate. We don't know for sure what they were looking for, but one of the things that we think they were looking for was there was a rumor that in the files cabinets of the Democratic National Committee were the psychiatric evaluations of Daniel Ellsberg. And the committee to re-elect the president thought that if they could get a hold of these medical records of Daniel Ellsberg, which I'm not sure were even there, they could use those against Daniel Ellsberg and try him for treason and get him up, at least embarrass him in front of the American people. So they broke into the committee and they were caught. And many of them ended up going to jail. Well, you don't need to know all of these great details. You can Google it if you want to. But bottom line is, President Nixon probably didn't plan that break-in. But when he heard about it, he covered it up. he decided that he would rather protect his own people than to admit that he knew anything about it. So keep that in mind. Make a note that Watergate happens, the invasion of the Democratic National Committee in June of 1972. Richard Nixon was going to run for re-election in November, and he will be re-elected. He will be running against a man by the name of George McGovern, McGovern, who is a senator, a United States senator from South Dakota. And McGovern was such a anti-war guy that that's the only issue he ran on. He was a one-issue candidate, get America out of Vietnam. He had some credibility because he had been a World War II veteran. He was a fighter pilot, a bombardier, flew bombing raids over Germany. So he had some credibility as we might say, as a veteran. But he didn't think Vietnam was an honorable war for America to be involved in. So Nixon wins by a very large majority in 1972. So Nixon still wants to get us out of Vietnam. And so Nixon will adopt a plan through his negotiator, Henry Kissinger. And I've got a phrase up here called the decent interval. The decent interval essentially meant that if the United States pulls out of Vietnam and the our South Vietnamese ally fighting against the communist North, if they end up eventually losing the war, America won't be blamed for losing the war. It'll be blamed on the South Vietnamese for not being able to finish the job. The reason that the phrase decent interval comes up is because Nixon and Kissinger, his negotiator, talked about, well, if there's a decent interval, and nobody defined what decent interval meant. But generally speaking, it was thought that it could be as long as 5 years, or maybe as long as even 10 years. But Nixon and Kissinger both sort of knew that eventually the communists would win this war. So the decent interval is just an idea that they talked about. It's not something that you'll see written down as a plan, but it was in their mind that the decent interval would be America gets out and then a bunch of bad things happen and we won't be blamed for it. So this is, we're in 72 now, Nixon is reelected. The negotiations are stalled in Paris. And so the United States, in just a few weeks before the election of November of 1972, Henry Kissinger thinks that the North Vietnamese, the communists, are about ready to agree to the plan. And the plan would be that America would pull out and we would get completely out, take all of our troops home. And as a result of that, we'd be out of the war. President Thieu, that I talked about the other day, President Thieu is very upset and concerned that when America pulls out, his guys won't be able to hold on and win this war. And he expresses to President Nixon that he's concerned about this. But Nixon says, don't worry about it. Don't worry about it, because if the communists invade South Vietnam to any great degree, I will bring in the B-52 bombers and bomb the hell out of them for doing that. Now keep that in mind, because that's what Nixon tells President Thieu in November of 1972, about the time he's being reelected for a second four-year term. Well, after the election, the communists appear to be digging their heels in about not agreeing to anything that the United States wants. So President Nixon bombs the hell out of North Vietnam over Christmas of 1972. We call it the Christmas bombings. We had already had the Easter bombings in 72, trying to get them to capitulate, trying to get them to agree to leave South Vietnam and leave the countries divided at the 17th parallel. But again, Nixon and Kissinger know it's going to be really hard to make this happen. So fast forward, Nixon's has inauguration in January of 1973. A couple of months later, the agreement is made. Henry Kissinger and Le Duc Thi agree to pull all of the Americans out by March of 1973. The condition, though, is horrible for the Vietnamese, for the South Vietnamese, our allies. I've got a map up here. And if you look at the top of the map, just around the 17th parallel, that's this line right here, right about there, just north of Hue. That line of demarcation between North and South Vietnam, just south of there, in this area right here, the North Vietnamese have thousands and thousands of their own troops. The deal that Henry Kissinger and Richard Nixon proposed to the North Vietnamese communists is, we will let you keep your enemy troops in South Vietnam. President Thieu of South Vietnam goes crazy. He says, wait a minute. Are you telling me that I'm going to have to allow the enemy troops to stay in my country? If I've got enemy troops in my country, I've got no country. Nixon says, don't worry about it. They have to stay in their garrison location. Now that just means in the places they already are. They can't move out of those areas. And he says to President Thieu, don't worry about it. If they move out of those areas, I will bring in the B-52s and bomb the hell out of them. Well, Thieu's pretty upset, but America wants to go home. So the deal is that by the middle of March, we will bring all of our troops out of Vietnam. There's not that many left anyway, but we're going to bring them all out. We're going to leave it totally up to the South Vietnamese to win this war. And the enemy is in the country, is still in South Vietnam, but we're going to let them stay there as long as they don't move out of it. And we're going to have a prisoner exchange. The North Vietnamese communists have been holding prisoners in what becomes known as the Hanoi Hilton. It's actually, the correct name is the Wallow Prison. Don't worry about writing it down, but if you go to Vietnam with me next summer, I'll take you there. So the deal is, we're going to bring these prisoners home, and the South Vietnamese are holding more North Vietnamese prisoners. They're going to allow them to come out of prison. So there'll be this prisoner exchange. And of course, if you want to YouTube some interesting things, you'll see prisoners coming home from Vietnam. The most famous one being a guy by the name of John McCain, who will eventually run for president of the United States in 2008. Just happened to die in 2018, not too many years ago. He was in prison for almost 7 years. So that's the deal. We're going to bring our guys home. We're going to bring all of our troops home by 1973. The only American troops that will be allowed to stay are the ones that are guarding the United States Embassy down in Saigon. They'll be allowed, Marines. they'll be allowed to stay. So that's the plan. So fast forward, this is March of 73. Fast forward 2 years to March of 1975. The communist North will launch what we call the Ho Chi Minh Campaign. They will come down the Ho Chi Minh Trail over here that we talked about, and they'll get to about right here, right about where I was stationed, right about there. And they will turn east and get on to Highway 14, and they will start a movement down through Central Highlands with the goal being to capture Saigon, in which case they will have won this war. Now, President Nixon in 1974, in the summer, there has been a trial, and there have been hearings. President Nixon is almost ready to be impeached. And he is told by his own party. You remember a long time ago, well, it seems like a long time ago, a couple of weeks ago, I talked about a guy by the name of Barry Goldwater that had run against Lyndon Johnson way back in 1964. Well, Barry Goldwater, sort of the conscience of the Republican Party, and he will go into Nixon's office in the White House, and he will say, Mr. President, tell me the truth about what happened at Watergate. Have you been covering this up? And he says, don't lie to me. And Nixon says, well, I've known about this almost from the time it happened. So Barry Goldwater says to him, Mr. President, you're going to be impeached. I can't stop it because your own party is going to go along with the impeachment. And Mr. President, you're going to be convicted. When the impeachment goes to the Senate for trial, you will lose, and you will become the first president to have been convicted and thrown out of office. So President Nixon becomes the first president of the United States to ever resign his office. President Nixon resigns, and we have a new president. His name is Gerald Ford. Ford takes office in the summer of 1974. President Ford had been a congressman from my state of Michigan. He was from Grand Rapids, Michigan. Actually played football for the University of Michigan. President Ford is probably, and you can write this down if you want to, President Ford is probably the only president we've ever had that didn't want to be president. Almost every president we've ever had, that's their desire in life. If you become a congressman or you become a senator, your goal is to become president of the United States, except Gerald Ford liked his job as a congressman. Well, back in those days, after President Kennedy had been assassinated, we put in this new plan that we didn't ever want to again have a president not have a vice president. So we put in this amendment to the Constitution that said that the president of the if we ever have an opening, the president of the United States will nominate and the Senate will confirm a vice president. Well, Nixon had a vice president by the name of Spiro Agnew, A-G-N-E-W, who had gotten in trouble in Maryland when he was a governor for accepting some bribery money of some construction companies that were building roads in Maryland. So he was forced to resign. So Nixon didn't have a vice president. So under the new amendment to the Constitution, he decides to appoint someone. So the way Nixon's mind worked is he said, who can I appoint that nobody would ever want to be president so they won't get rid of me? And so he says, how about that guy, Gerald Ford, who was the Speaker of the House of Representatives? Well, everybody loved Gerald Ford. They may not have wanted him to be president, but they really liked Gerald Ford and they hated Richard Nixon. So with Nixon, all the problems he'd had with Watergate, Nixon was not a popular man. I always like to compare him to our previous president with President Trump. There were a lot of people that really liked President Trump. And when it came time to impeach him, he was impeached twice, actually. But he was never convicted because the votes were not there, because there were a lot of people in America, and maybe some of you on this in this class, that really liked President Trump. Well, President Nixon was not a very popular guy, even though some would argue he was a fairly decent president. And he did get us out of Vietnam, blah, blah, blah. Well, Nixon isn't around anymore. So Gerald Ford has taken over in the summer of '74. So here we are with this group of these communist soldiers coming down right through the middle of Vietnam. And they're coming down in such numbers that it looks like the South Vietnamese, our allies, are not going to be able to hold back this invasion of communist forces. So the United States is going to do what we can to keep this from happening, but we can't. But President Ford goes to Congress and he asks for $438 million to help the South Vietnamese hold back the communist forces, and Congress will not give him the money. Now, we can make an argument that it wouldn't have worked anyway, because the communist forces outnumbered the South Vietnamese forces, and the South Vietnamese government sort of gave in. In fact, President Thieu and President Nguyen Cao Ky, that I talked about on Tuesday, will flee the country. And in fleeing the country, they take a whole lot of money and gold with them, and they come to the United States. So the South Vietnamese soldiers are left on their own to try to hold off the communist northern soldiers. Now, on April 30th, 1975, this tank will crash through the presidential palace in Saigon, flying in this case, flying the flag of South Vietnam. Excuse me, of North Vietnam. So here they are coming in into the palace. President Thieu is left. Vice President Nguyen Cao Ky is left. And the only people that are left in there are the staffers. And you remember we talked about this guy named Viet Minh? Well, Viet Minh is about all that's left. He becomes the president of South Vietnam, and he then surrenders to North Vietnam. And this tank is on display. If you go to Vietnam with me, I'll show you this tank. So for America, the war is over. For the South Vietnamese, the war is over because they have been conquered by the communist troops to the north. So what does this all mean? Well, I usually say that there are 7 US presidents that have been involved in this war. If we take it all the way back to Harry Truman, there's 1. President Eisenhower follows him, there's 2. President Kennedy follows him, there's 3. President Johnson follows him, there's 4. President Nixon is 5. Gerald Ford is 6. And I will add the name of this guy, President Jimmy Carter. How's that happen? Well, the United States has lost this war. And when you talk to your uncle or your grandpa or somebody that served in Vietnam, and they'll tell you that we didn't lose the war, here's the problem with that. The mission of the United States of America was to keep South Vietnam free, keep it as a democracy. We didn't say we're going to conquer the North. We said we're going to keep the South free. Now, I go back to Vietnam a lot, and it's a communist country. And if our goal was to make sure it wasn't communist, it is. Okay? President Jimmy Carter will run, Jimmy Carter will run against President Gerald Ford in the next election in 1976, and he will defeat Gerald Ford. So Gerald Ford is one of our only presidents that we've had be president that was never elected president. And Jimmy Carter, because the Paris Peace Agreement that had been signed by President Nixon way back in 1973 said that we would pay reparations to Vietnam. What that meant was we will take some responsibility for rebuilding the country. But the idea was if we take responsibility for rebuilding the country, we're going to expect you to do certain things. And one of the things you're not supposed to be able to do is to invade the South. So Jimmy Carter will take the position that the North invaded the South, therefore we're not going to pay them the $28 billion in reparations. So America will never pay reparations. But Jimmy Carter will do one other thing. He will say to the thousands of Americans who have evaded the draft, not just been draft dodgers, like so many men of my age, including our most recent president, Trump. He will say to the people that left America and went to Canada, we will allow you back in. If you want to come back in, we're going to grant you amnesty. Amnesty. You can have your citizenship back. Now, a lot of guys said, hell with that, I'll just stay in Canada. But some did come back. So President Carter, I argue, is the seventh president, even though he's not in the wartime as president. He is in the legacy part of this war, of this time. So America has lost a war. First time in our history. I would argue that we start a period of what I call collective amnesia. Collective amnesia. That is, as a country, we want to forget Vietnam. We want to forget those who served in Vietnam. We want to forget those who decided not to serve in Vietnam. We want to put our country back together again. And the best way to do that is pretend it never happened. Ignore it. And from about 1975 to 1979, that 4-year period, America is trying to forget Vietnam. We'll actually have a problem in Iran that I'll talk about a little bit in probably next week. We Americans have turned against soldiers. They've turned against veterans. And as sad as it is to say, World War II veterans have turned against Vietnam veterans because they won their war and we lost ours. And yeah, I can remember being told that when I made an application to join the Veterans of Foreign Wars in Michigan. And I was told, you're not welcome here because you lost your war. It was a bad time to be a Vietnam veteran. There was a man by the name of Jan Scruggs, and I want you to write his name down. Jan Scruggs, Scruggs. If you want to know about this man, there's a very fine movie that you can watch free on YouTube called To Heal a Nation. To Heal a Nation. And if it's not on your, I can't remember if I had it on the syllabus as a movie that you can watch about Vietnam to get extra credit. If it's not on there, I'll give it to you right now if you want to watch that movie. It's a made-for-television movie. Julie Roberts' brother, Eric Roberts, plays Jan Scruggs. Jan Scruggs is a very close friend of mine. Jan Scruggs decided that we had to do something about the fact, and he was a Vietnam veteran. He had shot up, Purple Heart, all that stuff in Vietnam. He decided that there's something wrong. There's all these memorials to soldiers in Washington, D.C. and around the country. And he said, there's something wrong with this. We need a memorial for those who served in Vietnam. But more importantly, we need a memorial for those who were killed in Vietnam. At that time, about 58,225. So he started a plan. He went to Congress to get approval, to get the land right next to the Lincoln Memorial, the most valuable space in all of Washington at that time, right on the mall. And he said, we're going to build this memorial. And we're going to have a contest to see what that design should look like. And so they had a contest. And he said, the only thing that we're going to require is that we want the name of every single soldier who was killed in Vietnam to be etched on this memorial. He didn't say it was going to be a wall. He just said it's going to be a memorial. And they had a contest to see who could design something. And then they had a committee. And surprisingly, they didn't have any Vietnam veterans on the committee. It was a committee of architects. And it was a blind committee. It was a blind application process. They had 1,425 applications for this memorial. And the committee chose the winner. And the design is what you're looking at there. It is a wall. It is called, we call it now, the wall. And that wall has the name of every single man and the 8 women who were killed in Vietnam. And all of those names are listed chronologically by their death, not alphabetically, chronologically by their death, so that those who died are near those who they died, who they were serving with when they died. Now, that contest to see who would win and be named the architect of the wall of this memorial was open to anyone in the country. And the person that was given that won the award to build this wall, to design it, was a 22-year-old architecture student at Yale University by the name of Maya Lin, M-A-Y-A-L-I-N, Maya Lin. All these famous architecture firms couldn't believe it, that they gave it to a student. Vietnam veterans, some, were upset that they gave it not only to a woman, an Asian woman. She's actually Chinese American, 22 years old. And her idea was to build this wall and put all these names on it. There was a huge controversy about this memorial. A lot of veterans didn't like it because it because it was dark, it was black, unlike most memorials that are white and denote some success. This one was dark. Well, the controversy spilled over into president at that time, the president of the United States, was a guy by the name of Ronald Reagan, who I will be talking about some next week. And Ronald Reagan said, well, we've got to solve this controversy, turned it over to the Arts Council to make the decision as to what would be the answer to this terrible design by some veterans' ideas. And the argument was that we would build or the compromise would be that we would have a statue next to it. And it looks like this. Or in my office, this bronze memorial. That was the compromise. When the wall was dedicated in 1982, it changed the attitudes of a lot of veterans. I was one of those veterans who hated the design until I went to see it. And when you walk up to it, and I know many of you have been to Washington and you've seen it, the neat thing about it is you walk up to that wall and you look at a name, and while you're looking at that name, you see yourself. So if you are of my age group who didn't serve, you can make the argument that those names are there and mine isn't. And yet I'm the one, as a citizen of America, who sent you there. It's very dramatic. People started etching names. This is the name of my man who died in my arms, Ed Roberg. This etching was given to me by one of my students who went there and etched it for me, but I've etched it myself many times. It means a lot to me. And Jan Scruggs, the man that I'm talking about, that was had the idea, not the design, but he had the idea to do it in the first place and raise the money, is now helping us at Texas Tech raise funds for our new archive and Museum of the Vietnam War here at Texas Tech. So Jan's very special to me in my life too. But there was something missing in this design, and that is there were 68,000 women who served in Vietnam. Many of them served as nurses. And so in 1993, another memorial was built, the Vietnam Veterans Women's Memorial, or this one that's in my office. And it shows nurses. It shows a man being administered to. This design for this one was by a woman whose name you all know. Her name is Glenna Goodacre. And she is the road. She is named, the road is named after her. That is right outside of our football stadium here at Texas Tech. She's a graduate of Coronado High School. Tragically just died last year or the year before. Lived in Santa Fe, New Mexico. And when this memorial was taken from her design studio in Santa Fe to Washington, D.C., they came through Texas Tech, and we had a ceremony for them there. It was before my time, but we had a ceremony for her. Glenna Goodacre Boulevard, if any of you live at the center, your address, I think, is Glenna Goodacre Boulevard. Glenna Goodacre is a very special person, and has done some great work, but that's one of the other things that she did. So I have a slide up here that says Vietnam Doi Moi. This is a phrase, a Vietnamese phrase that means openness or openness, commemoration, efforts to change. And it really is the struggle, represents the struggle that Vietnam went through from the time America left in 1973. Then they are successful in 1975 in getting their country unified as a communist country. And the tremendous economic depression that they suffered as a result of America's war. And it wasn't until about 1985, about 10 years later, that things started to change for the better in Vietnam. And they started to adopt a little bit of a market economy based on capitalism, even though they're a communist country. So I always like to end my lecture on Vietnam by telling you a story. I have up on the slide, I have a screen up here that represents my efforts in Vietnam, my current efforts. As I told you, I think I told you, I was one of those Vietnam veterans who came home from Vietnam in 1971 and kissed the ground and said, I will never go back to that hellhole. And I've been back 16 times. I think my total time spent in Vietnam now is equal to the amount of time that I was there during the war. I've been there over a total of over a year. And I've taught there. And I met a sociologist there on one of my trips who was doing a study of American attitudes towards Vietnam and of Vietnamese attitudes towards Americans, your age group. So she did a survey, she did a study of your age group, 18 to 20-year-old students in both America and college students in Vietnam. And the question was, for the Vietnamese students, what is the first thing you think of when you hear the word America? 33% of them said Americans are rich. 33% said, oh, we love Hollywood, we love your music, we love your movies. And 33% said, when we think of America, we think of music. We think of rock and roll. We think of hip hop. And then the American students were asked the same question. What is the first thing that you think of when you hear the word Vietnam? And the answer was war. Your age group, you hear Vietnam, you think of war. That's very sad, because before America showed up in Vietnam in 1954 or 55, Vietnam was a country that had been at war with China for 1,000 years, at war with the French for 100 years, but they're still a good country, good people. So at Texas Tech University, and particularly for me in the job that I have here at Texas Tech, my goal is to change that attitude, to change it from Vietnam is a war to Vietnam is a country with beautiful people. And in my time in Vietnam a few years ago, I was honored. These are my students. Now, you'll notice that there's not a lot of men in this picture. Me, down there in the middle, this happened to be International Women's Day, and I was the featured speaker. These students are the international relations students at the University of Social Sciences and Humanities in Vietnam. And I taught there for 6 months. And then I taught there again in 2018 for 3 weeks. And I'll be teaching there again, I hope maybe even this next fall. I love the people of Vietnam. I never thought I would utter those words. being somebody that wanted to get out of there as quickly as I can, but I really do feel that way about them now. And with that, I will answer questions.
Yes, Professor.
Yes.
I just want to say, since we're wrapping up the Vietnam War, I wanted to say for all of us, thank you again for your service during the war and afterwards. Just from the bottom of our hearts, thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Denny. I
Thank you.
appreciate that a lot.
Yes, thank you for everything.
I second that.
Absolutely. Thank you, Professor.
It's very nice.
Yes,
Been
thank
the best
you.
professor I've had so far.
And let me say this, that the really sad thing, those of you that stay with me, I notice your faces and your names that stay with me to the end of these lectures, and that's very much appreciated. But also the thing that I'm most sad about is that we're not together in room 104 in Holden Hall, because you would have seen a lot of video. You would have appreciated a lot of the things. You would have heard a lot of music. Last year, when I taught this class 2 years ago, taught the Vietnam War class 2 years ago, I had 3 teaching assistants, one from Vietnam, one from Canada, and one from England. So I had 3 international students as my TAs, which was really very cool. And I have right now, I have 3 PhD students, all women, all military historians. One of them is from 2 of them are from Hanoi, and one of them is from Saigon. And their families fought against each other, fought against me, and one's from Hanoi. And here we are, 50 years later. And we're trying to learn some of the mistakes that we made in that war. But I do appreciate your comments and all of that. But I would be glad to also answer any content questions that you may have about this lecture today, or of any of the lectures that I've done on Vietnam, because we've gone through it. I think we've gone through it fast, because I did it in 4 lectures, and I usually do it in 35 lectures. So.
Yes, I do have a question.
Who is that? Glenn?
Me. Yes. Who was the vice president for Nixon when he had to resign? What was his name?
The vice president, Gerald Ford.
No, when the one who resigned.
Oh, that one. Spiro Agnew. Spiro was his first name, and his family name was Agnew, Agnew. He had been the governor of Maryland, is how he got in trouble with taking some bribery money from some contractors.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
A question.
Who do we? Aaron?
Yes, sir. So
Yeah.
with Jimmy Carter as president, one of the things you were talking about that he wanted to do with Vietnam was the war reparations. So it was several billions of dollars. But you said that those were actually never paid because North Vietnam would not invade the South.
Right. He decided not to pay it because he said that the North Vietnamese had violated the conditions of the terms of the Paris Peace Accords. Now, you can make that argument that that's true, but you can also make the argument that, remember when I talked about the Marshall Plan? And I talked about how America poured a lot of money into Italy and a lot of money into Germany, who were our enemy too. Right. And you can make an argument that sometimes you do things with reparations. You may not call them reparations, you would call them investments. Now, America is a very close ally of Vietnam. In fact, Vietnam, this is one of the things that is most shocking to my students when I take them to Vietnam, is they assume that there's going to be this hatred for America. And you see these students riding along on their mopeds, on their motorbikes, wearing American flags on the back of their shirts. They still hate the Chinese. They've been hating the Chinese for 1,000 years. But they see America as a country that will maybe try to keep the Chinese at bay from them, because we hate the Chinese too. I don't mean it that way, but we don't hate Chinese people, but But
Yeah.
China is a country, you know what's going on between the United States and China now, and has been going on for some time now. So from the Vietnamese perspective, their idea is, well, maybe it's a good thing for us to get even closer to America, even though we are a communist country. There's only 5 communist countries left in the world, and they are one of them.
Thank you.
Yes. Anything else?
I have a question.
Byron?
Firstly, I'd like to say thank you for everything you've done during and after the war. And secondly, my question would be, what were the responses to the first question to Vietnam students? It was like 33% rich, and then what were the others?
Yeah, 33% said you're all rich. 33% we think of Hollywood when we think of you, and then the third one was music, rock and roll and hip hop music.
Okay, thank you.
Anything else?
Yes, sir.
I have,
Sorry, no, go ahead.
Emily?
it's just a quick question. What year was the Ho Chi Minh campaign?
It started in February of 1975, and it ended on April 30th. So it's essentially it was only about 6 weeks, and it was very successful. They named it the Ho Chi Minh campaign. Excuse me. And the people running it, you'll get a kick out of this. General Giap that I've been talking about was not really part of it. He had been pretty much marginalized by that time, even though he wasn't that old. He was not felt that he should run it. He gave him credit for getting it ready to be run, but it was actually run by other people, and it was successful. And I should say this: there's some great courage. Excuse me. Hold on a minute. I'm teaching. I'll let you teach. I'm teaching Saigon right now.
Oh, okay. That's right. Sorry, I thought it was great.
I'm gonna get your coat off and come over here. There was some great courage shown by those American Marines and Navy people on from about April 25 to April 30th of 1975, when they tried to get Vietnamese who had fought alongside Americans out of Saigon and get them back to America, because the fear was there'd be a bloodbath, and in some ways there was. But then there were also a tremendous number of people who were sent to what are called re-education camps. Think of it as prison. Think of it as prison. In fact, I actually am going to introduce you to somebody, and she's going to not want to say hi, but I'm going to make her say hi here, because I have in my office somebody that just showed up who's one of my PhD students from Saigon, whose family was involved in that evacuation, but they didn't leave, they stayed. And come here, Carrie, I want to introduce you to these people.
Welcome to text me. Where are they?
Right here.
Oh, hey.
Take your mask off just to show you can show them. You're vaccinated.
Where are we on the campus?
We're both vaccinated. Take your mask off so they can see your face.
Hey guys.
Hi.
What a
Hello.
trip.
Hey.
What do you think about the professor? You like his lecture?
Yeah, they're great.
We all love his.
I love him.
Good.
Yes.
He's awesome.
Well, he can be really tough.
Carrie is a graduate. She is a graduate of this university that I've been telling you about. And she came here. I met her in study abroad many years ago, and she's now writing her dissertation. She will graduate next year with her PhD. Right now, she is a GPTI. If you weren't taking my class, you could take her class. She teaches U.S. history here at Texas Tech. And her mom married her dad. And 6 weeks, her dad was an officer in the ARVN. And 6 weeks later, Saigon fell, and most of her family got on a plane and left, but her dad wouldn't leave. They had just been married 6 weeks, And her dad wouldn't leave because his mom was still there and his elderly mom, and he wanted to stay with his mom. So he stayed, and that cost him because they took him to the re-education camps, and he was in the re-education camps for 3 years, and he suffered so much so that he died when Carrie was 14 years old. And so from her perspective, she's one of ours now here at Texas Tech.
Did you tell them about the strategic Hamlet program?
No, we didn't. I didn't have time. I had to teach Vietnam in 4 weeks, four lectures.
Well, you guys know, it's like how the Vietnamese culture is very family oriented. So my dad, he had like 11 siblings. So like my grandmother had 11 kids. And can you imagine they all, find a way to flee? And you couldn't blame them. They know it will be terrible if they stay, But at that time, my dad was stationed closer to home. So I remember, this is what I heard growing up, that my grandmom just like crying and say that I have 11 children and they all, left me. If you, I talking to my dad, if you also go, I would have 0 kids. And he just married my mom like back in March of 75. So, they are newly wedded couple. They are so in love, and I don't know, it just, I think my dad did have some good American friends who say that if you go, we will make sure that we have a seat for your wife too. There will be, some signal, and just go to that helicopter. We take you to the ocean, and big boat out there. But he couldn't leave his mom, so he stayed, and my mom stayed too. And it was rough for them. They told him that just pack your clothes, and things just enough for a few days, maybe 3 days. And that was very common, when Saigon fell and the North took over, and they want to re-educate. That's what they say. Everyone, make sure everyone understand what is communism and how we're going to, start a new life under this new regimes, right? So, if you being optimistic, you would think, okay, that makes sense. Just some sort of class that you need to take. So he just packed his clothes for 3 days. I don't know, sometimes I wonder deep down, I wonder if my dad already sort of knew. I don't know. I am like my friends say that I am a perpetual optimistic. I think I took it after my dad because he was optimistic. He always see the good in people. But guess what? He never returned from that 3 days. They took him away for 3 years. And in the beginning, the family didn't know where he was, like they know that he probably been in prison, but he was also a soldier. So you don't really know what would they do to him, you don't know if they try to revenge or kill him or anything. And then finally, I think mom figured out where he was. So my mom, tried to, just like many other South Vietnamese women, try to visit her husband. It was really hard. Mom said that she had to work on her food for like several days, and not just like working freely, like she carried a lot of stuff that she thought that she can bring in the like prison, so to speak, for him. So, it was really hard. And she carried all of that stuff with her, and she worked on her food like for days. And when she got there, they said that, no, your husband is not here. So what happened that they moved the prisoner around. And I don't know why they do that.
There was no danger of America coming back in, so it wasn't like they thought they would leave.
Honestly, I feel like it's a way of them punishing, like this family. Well, because mom and dad, they live in the South. My dad speak fluent English and had American friends. So I feel like they were just being cruel in the way that they punish him and they punish her. So they know, all right, you taking all of this food for your husband. Guess what? He's not here. So what happened that she would have to, like continue her journey. So sometimes she couldn't see her husband like for weeks. And sometimes I think about my mom and I love her. She just like this very, very small size woman and carry all of that. A lot of social turmoil, that's why I don't know if Dr. Mylan mentioned about this with you, because I know it's kind of controversial and politically like highly charged, but recently President Biden announced that they were going to withdraw all US personnel out of Afghanistan by September 11 of this year. Obviously everyone has their own interpretation. I know we have been there for 20 years. A lot of people die, but sometimes studying this conflict, it's hard to not make the comparison.
Yeah.
And after the Vietnam War, and I mean the Afghan people, I'm sure that a lot of them had been collaborated and worked very closely with the American advisor for all this year. So I just hope that their family will have some safety, if not peace.
Thanks, Carrie. Thank
Thank
you very much. I can't believe she just walked in here.
Thank you.
Thank you guys for hearing me rambling. I'm
No,
sorry.
thank you.
I
Thank you for
don't
telling us
know.
that.
Yes, thank you
Yeah,
for
that was
sharing.
nice.
This is my academic advisor and my favorite professor. So I love him and I love all of his students, like you all. So have a good rest of the semester.
Thank you. Same
You
to
too.
you.
Thank you so
Yeah.
much.
Thank
you.
So
Professor,
I will also tell you this, that her dad served for 15 years in that military, and there's no recognition in that country of those that fought on the side that he fought on, which was on our side, who would have been considered to be a traitor. And so there's no recognition anywhere in the country of him. So when Carrie came to America as a student here at Texas Tech, I'm involved, and I think I mentioned to you, I'm involved in a place called Angel Fire. I'm on the board of directors of the memorial, Vietnam Memorial at Angel Fire, and we have a brick. We lay bricks each year for veterans of all wars, not just Vietnam. But when Carrie's mom came to visit about 6 years ago now, my wife and I bought a brick for her dad and put it next to all of our American bricks there. And her mom didn't know that, and she saw that name, and she really broke down to know that the only place that he's honored is here in New Mexico, 6 hours from here. So, well, listen, y'all have been good. You have any other questions about anything that I can answer before we let you go and enjoy your weekend?
I was just going to ask, how does the communist government feel about the students all being in American flag wear and things like that? Imagine it pisses them off.
I know. No, it doesn't piss them off at all. I mean, remember last 2 years ago, I think when President Trump met with Kim Jong-un, one of the places that they met was in Hanoi. And so they're really close, being very close to America. And so it's, and of course we have a lot of money and we send tourists there. And if you ever get a chance to go there, Vietnam is one of the most beautiful destinations that you can ever go to. And I think I told you guys this before, they have 95 million people, okay, about a third the size of America. They've had 35 COVID deaths, 35, not 35,000, 35. Because they shut their country down and they did all the right things to make sure. Now they're a communist country, they can make people do things. That's, none of us like that. But at the same time, they saved a lot of people's lives. And I wanted to go back this summer. I want to take my students this summer, but right now they're not exactly welcoming us because we aren't exactly a country that did a very good job with our COVID problem. So, but they're great people and great people in all respects. And I don't think you noticed this, but so do I have anything in here? The way I met this woman is that I met her on study abroad, And I was wearing a necktie. I don't wear neckties very much, but I was wearing a necktie and it said Harley Davidson on it. Her dad built Harley Davidson motorcycles from scratch. After he got out of the camps, he went around the country and picked up old parts and built these motorcycles and sold them to the French and the Swiss and the Germans that were all occupying Vietnam after the war. And so she saw my tie and said, hey, my dad did that. So we have a Harley Davidson connection too. All right, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for your time today. And make sure you know to, we've got, if you're gonna send me extra credit, that's due, what did we say, 27th, I think. I'll give you till midnight that night to get those in. Make sure that you don't plagiarize them. Make sure you write good reviews of them, and send them to me. You don't have to send them to your TA. Send them to me, and I will read them. And then your essay, you've also got an essay that's due. So work with your TAs. Your TAs want you to do well in this class, okay?
The extra credit is due April 29th, the same day as your essays.
Okay, 29th, whatever. Yeah, all right. And those are due to me, and your essays are due to your TAs. I don't need to see your essays. They'll be grading the essays, okay? All right, y'all take care. Have a great weekend. It's gonna get warm this weekend, I hope. And I will see you all next Tuesday, and we'll do civil rights, okay?
Thank you, sir.
Thank
You have a great day.
Thank you.
Take care.
Thank you, Professor.